Hey everyone, Grayscale here, and today I'm doing a tutorial on how to go from grayscale to color. Now, I feel like I've already done this before, so it might just be a refresher for some people, but enough people seem interested, so go over it again. So the first important thing is this. I made this chart called Color and Value, and you can download it from the resources section of www.cycra.net. And basically it just shows what values certain colors are. So you'll see with yellows, for instance, the color yellow, see here on this color wheel, like all the colors are kind of represented as if they're equal, but they're not equal in value. They're just, equal in intensity and saturation. So super saturated yellow is not going to be the same value as a super saturated red. So you can see here, how reds are pretty dark, yellows are pretty light, greens have a bigger range, blues and purples have a pretty big range, and oranges are, fairly mid-tone. If you go darker in the orange, you tend to get into browns. If you go lighter, you tend to get into like peaches. So this is very important to know right off the bat. And the reason is that value is much more important in this to get right than color. So here's an image. Actually, that one's a bit offensive. The waist is implausible in the hair and stuff. So here we go. That's better. All right. So here's an image where, you have these gloves and they're fairly light value. The skull is much lighter, and then the hair is, pretty dark. So if I was going to use this and colorize this, but I thought, I'm going to make the gloves red, it's really not going to work. What's going to happen is these gloves are not they're too, actually they're about mid-tone value, but they're too light to be red. So if you do paint that, you get a problem that a lot of people have when they go from black and white to color, which is stuff like this. Like it just looks wrong. And if, for instance, the hair was supposed to be yellow, well, this is a very dark value, and yellows are very light. So even a dark yellow is going to be quite a lot lighter. And so you get this type of muddy coloring thing going on where this doesn't look yellow, this doesn't look red. This looks kind of neon, I guess, like it's a light. And this just looks really dirty. So you want to make sure your values are right first. So even if I had this, but I picked a darker value. So here I'm not going to change the color, I'm just going to change the value. Let's say something like this. So say I'm putting this down. I'm just going to put it in this small area. And then for the yellow, let's say I brought it up to something like this. Then we bring the color back. You can see how this actually looks like yellow. This actually looks like red. And that's just a demonstration that values are super important. So whenever people ask me, I'm going from grayscale to color and it doesn't work for me and the colors don't work, they kind of treat it like a color problem, but it's not a color problem. It's a value problem. So that's the first thing you have to get is correct values. Okay, so then the next thing is when you put down color and it just looks dead. For instance, let's say we wanted to just color the skin. So you put it down and it looks pretty lifeless, pretty dull, maybe plasticky. And that's a cause of the black and white or grayscale underneath. So what's happening is whatever color I'm putting down, provided I'm not pressing super hard, because if I press extremely hard, the color comes out like that. But because the color is being influenced by what's underneath it, it gets this grayish, grayed out feeling. It gets desaturated, and that's what contributes to that dead feeling. However, if we didn't work off grays and we worked off something like browns, then you wouldn't have that problem. So what I tend to do right in the beginning is, before I start coloring, I just fill a layer with like a brownish tone and set that to color, and then I can always adjust it. So let's say this is a bit too red. I can bring it towards, maybe more of a brown. And this is something you would do anyway in traditional. It's very common anyway. So let's say you were doing oil painting. Well, you might start with like a sienna tone and then work over that. And with that in place, when you put the color on, it gets a lot more saturated. It feels more correct because it's not blending with grays, it's blending with browns, and that works better. So that's the solution to that. Now, lately I haven't been using just a layer filled with brown like this. I tend to use a gradient map. I've talked about this in my video, Finishing Filters in Photoshop. I use these Arthur Gimaldinov gradients, and they're really good at getting like a base down. And the advantage these have to just one solid color is that they tend to change in saturation. Usually around the midtones it gets more saturated, which is kind of how color works. And then they also can go from warm to cool. So that's as well a good thing. So let's just pick something that looks kind of okay. See, I'm kind of looking for maybe a more brownish tone. Maybe something like that works. Okay, so then it's the same thing. I just work off this instead of this, but either one is fine. So let's just work off this for the sake of this video. All right, so I can start working on the skin, but what I rather would do at first is block in as many areas as possible. So the biggest area is the background, and I'm going to gray it down quite a bit. So you'll see how by changing the background, it's going to start to change what all the other colors feel like. And I'm not pressing super hard when I do this, and so you might see some variation in color where, it's a bit more gray or a bit more brown. That's actually okay. I'm not worried about that. I do that in painting as well. It's just, you're just adding variation in the hue, which is going to look interesting. And I mean, you could, if you don't like that look, just press super hard, and then you can get a very solid tone. But for me, I don't really mind when some of the background colors picked up. And sometimes you need to adjust these colors just because in the beginning it's quite hard to gauge what a color is. See, so already the skin's almost, like, it almost feels done just because the background is now so much cooler that the skin looks by contrast warmer. So you're playing a huge game of contrast. So again, I'm just going to put down color quickly so I get a sense of what this whole image is looking like. And when I do paint, I actually vary my pressure. So in the light side, so let's say like on this form, right? This part's lighter. I press harder. Then as we get towards the shadow, because I know the shadow's warm, it's that rich brownish color, I ease up on my pressure. So actually in some of the shadows, I'm just letting the original color show through. Because see how you get these darks that are kind of pleasant and warm. And that's why I like working off warm colors, because if I didn't, let's say this was let's just say this was a different color, like a greenish color. So see how that sort of makes things dead and dirty looking? And that's why I don't like working off things other than brown. See, when it's on black, it's like that, and it looks not great. But as soon as I add that brown, it's much better. So this is probably where most people are getting stuck, is on this. And then maybe the second thing is, you know, easing up and letting some of the shadow bleed through. So I'm going to do the gloves next. I believe they were white. I'm not going to stick to the original colors anyway, but when I go to white, I'm not going to go to, like, you'll notice I tend to just go towards gray when I want something desaturated here. And that's often enough. Even that's a bit much. You don't always have to go to the color you think it is. So for instance, white is a very cold color, so you might be tempted to go, you know, pure white and then put that down, but then it gets a bit too gray. What I'm doing is I'm trying to work within the colors I've sort of established. So, or let's say, you know, something like this, where it's like, oh, this is very bluish, and you might put that down and it comes across as bad. Well, the thing is that you need to consider what is around. So here, warm gray is going to be cool enough compared to the warmth I already have that I can get away with it. It's not going to look that wrong or out of place. So I can use these types of cool grays, or warm grays, in fact, as a replacement for blues. Like, they come across as pretty bluish. And that's just to do with color temperature. When you put a cool around a lot of warms, it looks more cool than it actually is. Again, talking about color temperature, not like, oh, cool, and that's very cool looking. So here, I'll show you how I'm really, you know, I'm going to press harder here. And then as we get towards the shadow, I'm actually going to just allow a lot of that shadow color to show through. So the shadows are nice and warm, and the lights are more cool. And that's because I'm going for a cool light, warm shadow scheme, which is something I really like. So, okay, got that. I guess I could color this metal. And because the values are right, this goes quite quickly, you know, getting all the colors in place. It doesn't take that long because you're just basically putting one tone over whatever, and it just makes the color work. So let's go towards a face, because I think that's an important area that a lot of people struggle with, especially in terms of, you know, subtle skin tones. So the first thing I want to do is change the eyeballs to something a bit more like that. And I'm not using pure white, because if I use pure white, it's going to become gray. See, it's going to become way too cool for what's around. So what you can do is pick the color of the skin, or the color that it actually is. So let's say here right now, it's brownish, right? So I can pick that brownish tone. And then I can say, okay, I need to cool this down. So then I'll bring that color towards a gray. And then I'll lightly go over until it looks okay. And when it might not look that good, it's still something where you have to consider that it will look different anyway at the end, because you're going to be fiddling with these. Even if you're quite good, like for myself, I'm decent with values. I wouldn't say I'm the best, but I'm okay with values. But it still requires a lot of tweaking in a painting stage after this stage. So when I put things down and they're not perfect, it's like I tweak those colors. I'm not going to worry about it right now too much, because I know I can do that later. So it's more important just get the information down. Now for the teeth, with eyes, I tend to make them cooler, more towards blue, and with teeth, I make them more towards yellow. That's not to say I'm gonna, do this and get yellow teeth. Please don't do that and then say, oh, this is what Cycra said to do. I'm just gonna go towards like more of a yellow than the eyes are. Now for the lips, it's pretty much the same. I don't want to get too intense with it because especially with the value, it's going to be pretty similar to the skin unless you're wearing makeup or something like that. So if I just pick the value of or even the color of the lips, and then I just move it towards a red and warm it up. And you can do this like no matter what the skin tone is. Usually the lips are going to be a bit more reddish, or they might go towards like a purplish. So you just move it towards that color. And then if you look at this color, it's not really what you would think of as red. Maybe it's a bit more of a reddish orange brown. But when I put it down, it's going to feel like a red. And that's because it's warmer than what's around it. So I can just do things like that. And I can also, use it for things like blush or redder areas in the face, and that's just where there's more blood. So think about where there's going to be more blood, probably the cheeks, the ears, where else, maybe around the eyes it might get a bit redder. So you can just put more warmth into the areas where, there's a lot of blood under the surface. And then for other areas, like let's say the forehead, you can actually select that and cool it down. So I'm just moving it towards more of a yellow, desaturating it a bit, and just putting some of that down. So now on the forehead, that feels more bony. And you can go ahead and do that in different areas. Like for this area, there's a lot more bone here. All this, that's a rib cage, so you could cool that down. You can just look for the areas where, there's going to be more protrusions of bone and things. That's going to cool down. Same is true for areas that aren't getting as much sunlight. So like the neck, you can actually cool that down a bit just because, it's not getting as much of a tan. Now, where you have to be very careful is around the chin and the mustache area of a girl, because you don't want to do this. It's going to look like a 5 o'clock shadow if you bring a lot of cools around there. So if I do any at all, I'm very careful about it, because it doesn't take long before that can get out of hand, and it can just look like, okay, so this person has a mustache now. So that's the basics of laying in color. Of course, you can, spend a lot more time on detailing, but once you've got the basics down, it goes pretty fast. And then I can just color pick from what I have already, and then work those tones in, and then switch to painting. So there are other things that you can do, and those are like finishing effects. So I'll talk a bit about those. Maybe I'll do a bit of painting first. So usually I'll put down this color layer, and then once I've got enough information, I'll just work off a normal layer, and I'll start picking colors and then adjusting them. So for instance, let's say around this nose, I want it to warm up. So it feels a bit cool around here. So I'll take some of this warm that I already have on the canvas. Like I have most of the colors I need already on the canvas. Or I'll take this and then I'll just, warm it up a bit. Put in that warmth, blend things out, make subtle variations where they're needed, because it's going to be a lot more noodling, I guess, when you deal with very subtle color shifts that you might not notice in values. Sometimes with values, because it's just black to white, the subtlety doesn't need to be as strong. But when you've got a lot of different colors and you can explore not just light to dark, but also warm to cool. So you can also put like a highlight, so make it cooler and lighter, and then maybe there's a highlight on the nose. And you could put one on the lip as well. Maybe warm that up a bit on the lip. Maybe saturate it in this area. Like I usually, whenever it goes dark, like into shadows, like here, I usually warm that up a lot more. So something like that. You might have a highlight like right there. Maybe a bit of a highlight on the chin. But these are very subtle variations, right? Like I'm not doing this. I'm not like, okay, so look at this color on the thing. This is a highlight color, but it's not white. It's not even close to white. Let's just put down white as an example. That would be white, right? So it looks way too unrealistic when it is white. And here, if I want to put a highlight, I have to select this, because see what I did? I put this here and it's way too warm. And that's because this is around a warm color. So of course it's gonna warm up. It's gonna look okay. But this is much cooler. So I have to take this color, then cool that down a bit. And then I can get a highlight that's suitable for that area. So, I mean, here I can pump up the highlight on that maybe. Maybe not to white, but a lot stronger, because this is skin. So it's not as reflective as like an eyeball. I can also, strengthen some of the darks, make the pupil stronger. Maybe here can add a bit more color. So it's a lot of taking the color you have, cooling it down or warming it up, lightening it or darkening it, and then adding your necessary, whatever you call it, like more information. So another thing I should mention is, some of the ways I lay down things. So let's say I wanted to add a shadow here, more like this, right? So what I do often is I'll put down this, and you can see how it's got quite a bit of texture to it now. It's really up to you how you want to paint, but for me right now anyway, I tend to get rid of a lot of that and just blend it all out. And I just use a smudge brush. And all my brushes are on, again, cypher.net. They're there for free. You don't have to pay anything, and yeah, you can get those. So that's like the super long, and I don't know, it's kind of okay, depends how you like it, but it's kind of like, well, after putting in the color layer, you then spend maybe, a few hours tweaking everything and making sure it all works and adjusting the colors. And so let's just pretend I had already done that, because it's going to take a really long time if I do that. But okay, so once that's done, you can start working on things like soft light and overlay. So there's 3 color modes I usually use: overlay, soft light, and color dodge. Now, of the 3 of them, actually I should put overlay in the middle. So soft light is the weakest. It's the nicest in a way. It just creates like a soft light. So let's say there was like a fairly cool light that was hitting here, right? So in soft light, we get something like that. And notice that when I put in light, I use a soft brush because I'm trying to replicate the feeling of atmosphere. And I also go over the area I want highlighted, but also I let that bleed into the area around, like the background. And that's very important because, that's how light works. It doesn't just hit an object and stop there. It hits the object, but it also bounces around and hits particles in the air, which it's going to make that area sort of like a bloom effect. So when you put in light, like let's say on this finger, you can go over the area and let it sort of bleed out, and that creates this very much more realistic look. So okay, so that's soft light. And I guess I'll just duplicate that layer that I already have and set 1 to overlay. So this is overlay. Now it's a bit stronger. You can see how, you know, the difference between this and this. And the other thing about overlay that I like is that, and this works with soft light too, but I can go light, like I can lighten things, but I can also darken things like that. So that's very good. And with color dodge, it's much brighter than the other two. And I like to uncheck these boxes, and then seems to work a lot better with color dodge. But you can see how overblown that is. Like, look at that compared to the soft light. So the thing with color dodge is most people don't really know how to use color dodge. And the way you use it is, unless you want something super neon, stay away from lighter values or saturated values like this, because this is what happens, right? I mean, you may like that look. You might really like, wow, that looks like super intense sunlight or something. And fine, you know, that's what you're going for. But if you just wanted to lighten something, it's good to go really dark and quite desaturated. And then it becomes much more controllable. See where I put this? So now look at before and after. It adds something, but it's not crazy. Even going halfway, you know, like a mid-gray is still going to be better than going to whites, because that just gets blown out super fast. So usually that's about the next stage. With color dodge, I usually save it for things like hair or areas. Like with color dodge, what it does is it saturates and lightens the color. So anywhere I want it to be saturated and light, I'll use color dodge. Now with soft light, I like to use it for areas where I have reflected light. So let's say I want some of this metal to reflect the skin. So I'll take the skin and I'll just, using a soft light layer, I'll just go into this bottom part where it would reflect onto the metal. And now it looks 3D. It looks like, okay, so that skin reflected into that. Maybe the same thing here in this glove. Can just take some of the skin and then sort of add that into the shadow. So now it looks like this shadow is getting influenced by light bouncing off this skin, right? So before, after. And maybe these changes are super subtle. I mean, for me, I guess as you do more, it looks a bit less subtle, but the more you do, the more you'll notice these little things, and it doesn't always have to be crazy. I mean, it's the same with a lot of things, like with curves and things. People often get a bit too exaggerated in the beginning. They'll go too crazy with colors, and they won't understand just how subtle things are. And when it comes to skin, it's super subtle. Like, let's say I wanted a highlight on this area right here on the breast here. I can pick this color, and then I'm just going to use this instead of I really like the color wheel just because I get to roll into colors. And this is a coolest wheel. I think I have a link in the description of what it is and where to get it and stuff. So I pick this color, and then I'm going to cool it. So cool means you scroll towards blue. So like if I wanted to really cool this, I would go towards blue, and that's much cooler. And then desaturating it also cools it down. So there's two ways of cooling. You can either go towards a more blue tone. And I would say this is probably like the coolest in terms of cold colors, something like that. So you can either go towards blue or in hue, so the color towards blue, or towards a desaturated. So anything gray or white, or that also cools it. So usually I like to do a combination of the two, but you don't have to go that crazy. So if I want to scroll towards blue, I can just go towards blue and then bring it a bit lighter and a bit less saturated, and that should be enough to get like a highlight tone. And it might not be that noticeable, but here's a before and after. It does lighten things, and it does look more correct than if I went, which is what's usually what I see is, people just go way too bright, and you get these kind of plasticky things going on. So that's not great. But yeah, so that's most of the work. And also with like an overlay, I might do things like subsurface scattering. So I'm gonna go towards the ears. I'm gonna pick like a pretty hot color, like maybe this orangey reddish color, and just put that in and see how it really warms those ears up. I mean, this is a bit of an overkill, but sometimes it's okay to like totally go over what you intend. Just go insane, maybe add some yellows as well in there. All right, so go too much, and then just lower the opacity to nothing, and slowly bring up the slider until you feel it, but you don't necessarily notice it too much, where it's more of like, I don't see the change, but I feel the change. See, you kind of feel the difference. Whereas if I waited until I saw it, I would probably go like, okay, now I start to really see the difference. But that's when you're already too much. So rather than seeing the difference, wait until you just can. I mean, of course you still can see it, but you feel it more than you see it. Like you still think maybe I need to go more to see that thing, but it's like, no, it's there. It's already there. Doesn't need to be that dramatic. All right. And then after, let's say I got all this correct and I was satisfied with it. Usually at the end, I throw on a color balance, and that's just because I am not perfect with color yet. And this really helps me to take out some of the inconsistencies that are found within using like a flat color. So let's say I didn't use a gradient map. Well, this helps to add interest. And usually what I do, is I work with cool lights and warm shadows. So the first thing I do is I go into the shadows and I warm those up. And again, I'm not doing this. Like I'm not going into like super red. That's not it. It's like see the slider? It's just +4 or something like that. I went -3 into greens. And what I do, like the way I tell is I just sort of slide back and forth very slowly until it looks like, yeah, okay, that looks okay. And then I go into the highlights and I just roll into, more of a cyan, cool that down, maybe add a bit of green and maybe some blue as well. And then for the midtones, I just sort of roll back and forth until it looks better to me. Now that's something that's subjective, so everyone's going to have a different idea of what better is. So this is where, your own artistic vision comes into play. You just put down what you like. Let's just do it before and after. And it really brings the colors together. It feels more finished. And then after this, you can keep painting, keep working on things. And if you need to just adjust the color, you can go back into like a color layer. Like let's say I wanted these crystal-y things, gems to be a different color, maybe something like that. Then I can take my brush and just, you know. That's weird. Got all purple. Okay, there we go. Some Photoshop problems. All right, so I could do things like that, for instance, right? And then if I need, you know, variation in that, you can do that too. So like, let's say I put in some green. Okay, that's quite intense. Let me tone that down a bit. Something more like that. So I can put that down. Then I can go ahead, you know, use maybe a color dodge and uncheck those boxes. Use a soft brush and maybe darken that down quite a bit. And then add, you know, a bit of that on the over the highlight first, letting it bleed a bit, and then on the opposite side, just lightly touching that, and then there you go. See? And then you can also use maybe a soft light and then pick some of that shiny color and then put that into, you know, some of the reflected highlights here, right? Let's say it affects the area around it. Well, that's what soft light's pretty good for that. And you can do that too here, you know, let it bleed into some of these shadows, make them a bit greenish. So yeah, that's basically it. Again, the most important thing is this. It's a value stage. It's not so much about colors as much about value. But then I guess the second most important thing is do not work, or try not to work off gray background. Like put some tone down, some warm, preferably warm, I guess, unless you're working with cools. Then you could put a cool tone, but yeah, put down a colored tone so that the colors you put on top are going to blend into that. And if they blend into gray, they're just going to get desaturated. So I hope that helped, and thanks for watching.